Welcome to Homebrew Master. I'm Sarah, and I'm your host and brewmaster. On this show, we find homebrewers and give them the opportunity to work with a professional. They get to learn some of the science behind brewing while I try to up their homebrew game. Today we're brewing with Richard, and we're making a mango wheat kveik. Later on, we're catching up with Heather from the Blue Elephant Artisan Brewery for the tasting. This is Homebrew Master. Welcome to Homebrew Master. I'm your host, Sarah, and today we're joined by Richard. Richard, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your history with brewing?
I started homebrewing about 7 years ago. I started with a 1 gallon starter kit. Started from all grain right off the start. I think I did the first 6 batches were 1 gallon, and then I pulled the trigger on a 5 gallon system.
Nice.
Pretty much stick to mostly ales. I've explored some other beers over the years. And just recently getting into some fruit beers.
Nice.
So today I brought something that I made quite recently that turned out fairly well.
Excellent. Very excited for that. So on that topic, what beers do you particularly like to brew and drink?
Fruit beer is definitely a common one in terms of category. So I've been working with raspberry, blueberry, apricot. I would like to do some work with peach, some blood orange at some point, some mango.
So today we're actually going to be brewing a mango wheat kveik beer for you. Yeah, so I'm very excited about that. So as you mentioned, you brought a beer for us to sample, so that's very exciting. Let's give that a taste now, and we can talk about what you like about it, what you maybe don't like about it, what you would do differently in the future. So since it's your beer, I'll let you pour that. Oh, come on with that color. I knew it was going to be pretty just looking at the bottle, but that's gorgeous. Do you think you got that a little bit more from the hibiscus?
Yeah, so I almost thought I messed it up, to be honest, when I began. There's 4 ounces of dried hibiscus in this. It was such a strong addition, I thought it would throw it off, but it came out pretty good.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Well, that's got a fantastic aroma, too. So the hibiscus kind of blends in to that berry really nicely together.
That's the goal.
Yeah. So I did pick up a commercial example to try, just so we can compare and talk about things we like about it, what we like more about yours, and how we might adapt those to your recipe. So this is a blackberry wheat. Oh my goodness. Straight off the bat, I'm pretty sure they used extract and not actual berries, so that's a little disappointing. One of the reasons why their color is nowhere near as attractive as yours.
Right.
But they definitely got the attenuation down, which would not be difficult if you're using an extract. I'm just gonna go ahead and say that your beer is significantly better than that, and maybe we'll move on. So I was kind of going for a blend of the beers you were talking about and the one I was able to find. So just to get into some of the ingredients a little bit, we are using 2 row for your base malt. We got a little bit of Munich in there just for some color and a little bit of body. And then from there, we're actually going to add some honey malts. And one of the reasons that I like adding honey malts, especially to my fruit beers, is that I find when you ferment out the sugars of the fruit, you lose some of that character that our brain sort of associates with fruit because it is sweet. So the honey malt, I do always recommend if you're trying a new malt, just give it a little taste. So the honey malt has its own sweetness and its own sort of honey flavor, which just sort of reinforces and brings some of that sweetness back into the brew that you are losing from the fruit through the fermentation process. Since the yeast is going to eat all of its sugars, I like to put just a little bit of something sweet in there to bring that back around. And then the other main ingredient we're using, of course, is wheat, which I don't recommend trying because you might break your teeth because it is very, very hard. But wheat gives it that nice, big sort of background malt, nice haze, which I always enjoy in a beer. And I just think it complements fruit really, really nicely. And then as far as hops are concerned, so I went with Cascade. You get those nice citrus notes, which balances, I think, nicely with most fruit beers that we make. Now, I don't particularly recommend tasting these, but I do recommend people to try a little hop rub. If you're trying a hop for the first time that you've never used before, most hops, when you smell them, they just all smell the same. They're very green, but if you put some in between your hands and the heat of your hands and rub it, you're actually going to release their essential oils, and then you can just smell your hands and you get that wonderful citrus aroma coming out that you're going to experience when you add them into the beer. And then of course it wouldn't be a fruit beer if we didn't add some fruit. So we're definitely going to be going in with some mango. Might add some lemon and lime to complement the Cascade. We'll kind of see how the beer is going as we move along. In general, when I'm adding fruit to beer, I do add it about 75% of the way through fermentation.
Okay.
The yeast is just in a really great place there to take on more sugar, because it's sort of getting to the point where it's going to go into hibernation stage and set up all of its stores so that it can get ready for the next time that it has food available. So if you wait till that point, the yeast is primed to just attack those sugars, get through the fermentation of the fruit sugars really quickly without you losing too many essential oils.
Are there any extra steps that you'll need to take adding the fruit?
I definitely recommend you want to get your fruit to a point where it's as accessible to the yeast as possible. So if you have a juicer, that's the best scenario. If you don't have that, then freezing your fruit and thawing it so it kind of softens it up, and then just banging it with a mallet or a rolling pin or whatever you got so that you're creating as much surface area for the yeast to attack. Because if you have big pieces of fruit, the yeast can't get to the middle, right? So you're just trapping all those flavors inside the fruit instead of letting them come out in your beer.
Right.
But that's pretty much it. That and adding it towards the end of fermentation so you don't lose too much of the flavor profile of the fruit are my two big tips for adding fruit to your beer.
Do you ever work with the fruit purees as well, or do you primarily work with whole fruit?
I've definitely worked with fruit purees before. I do really like them because, again, they're pureed, so everything has been broken down. What I don't like about them is that you end up with a lot of the fibrous tissue of the fruit in your fermenter. So what I usually do in that case is I'll actually put it in a hop bag, as if I was gonna do a dry hop. That just helps to keep most of the actual substance of the fruit out of my final product, instead of accidentally transferring some into your keg and then it gets stuck and you run into all sorts of issues.
Yeah, that's familiar.
Yeah, we've all been there. Well, let's get mashed in then on your beer.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. And so this is, of course, where the one vessel system turns from a mash tun into a kettle. Welcome back to Homebrew Master. We're about to brew a mango wheat kveik with advanced brewer Richard. Let's get started. All right, so we're ready to mash in. Now, because we do have a fair bit of wheat in our mash, I like to add some rice hulls first. Just helps prevent any sticking going on. I also have our strike water set up. Yeah, you can just go ahead and dump those right in. I have our strike water set up a little bit hotter than it needs to be since we'll be losing some temperature with the grain. So I just like to put the rice hulls in first to give them a moment to sort of start soaking up some water. Otherwise, they'll just float to the top when you add your grain. So rice hulls being the outer shell of rice. When you add a lot of grains like wheat that don't have their own hull, you want to add something else to help with the straining later on in the brew.
Right. My name is Richard Sutherland. I've been brewing for about 7 years now and experimenting with all different kinds of ingredients now. So brewing with mango, that's a new fruit for me. So looking forward to trying that. I've brewed wheat beers before. It definitely complements well with a lot of fruit styles. Definitely looking forward to this one.
So Richard was really interested in working with some fruit beers, and he had never done anything with mango before. So we came up with a mango wheat kveik for him. Now we were going for a 5-ish% beer. That's going to dictate how much grain you need, because the grain becomes sugar in solution that the yeast then eats, and that becomes your alcohol at the end. So for his beer, we went with 1.8 kilograms of wheat, which is a base malt, but it also adds a lot of haze and sort of different characters because it's a wheat instead of a barley. We used 1.7 kilograms of two-row, which is your general standard base malt that's going to give you most of your extract. 1 kilogram of Munich for a little bit of color, and 0.14 kilograms of honey to add a little bit of sweetness, because even though we're putting in fruit, all of the sugars get fermented out of the fruit, so I like to add a malt that's going to add a little bit of sweetness just to sort of give your brain the same sensation as if you were having some fruit. So for Richard's beer, we mash at 64 degrees Celsius. Now you generally range your mash temperature between 64 and 67 degrees. 64 is going to give you a lighter, crisper beer, whereas 67 is going to give you a more full-bodied, rich malt beer. Because we were sort of going for a more summer, easy drinking style, we went with 64 degrees Celsius. We're just gonna set that screen on top, pop our lid back on, and we'll just slowly recirculate for the entire mash. And there you go, we're mashed in. Set our timer for an hour.
Perfect. I think it's important to do the review that she did yourself with your own ingredients. Freshness and ingredient quality are one of the cornerstones of brewing. So to make sure that the ingredients you're getting are always fresh and they're always a high quality. You also just never know when there's something that's gone wrong, just something unexpected.
First impressions of Richard, he had actually used the all-in-one system that we were trying before, so he was really familiar with it. I would actually consider him sort of on the higher end of home brewer. The beer that he brought for us to sample was great. If I had produced that, I'd be really happy with it. His only concern is that the yeast had not consumed as much of the sugar that he was hoping for, but in the end, the final product still tasted amazing. All right, so it's been an hour. Our mash is all done, so time to move on. Since you've used the Brew before, might as well get you to do the next steps. So we're gonna turn our pump off, of course, clear that pipe, and get that arm out of our way. And I will trade you. And so this is, of course, where the one vessel system turns from a mash tun into a kettle, which is a very nice, convenient aspect for it. So I think our bed is getting a little dry, so I'll grab your first sparge water if you want to set it to the boil. All right, so everything's flowing really nice. I can get you to take over the sparge here. So as I'm sure you know, the sparge is where we are rinsing out all of the sugars and the flavor and the color from our malt and just getting everything we can out of it for our final product. And I do like to have my sparge water nice and hot. I set my sparge water to about 80 degrees Celsius just so it is warming things up as it goes through. And we're aiming for about 25 liters today, so that in the end, after the boil and fermentation, we'll end up with pretty much 20 liters bang on. All right, so we're getting close to the end of our sparge water, so I'm just gonna take a look here with the flashlight on my phone and see where we're at. So we're at about, looks like we're just hitting 20 liters right there. So probably one more of those and we'll be good. All right, so I think that'll probably be your last one. Let's just check again where our volume is at. Yeah, we're already at 24 liters. So we'll just give that a minute, pull it off, and then we'll just wait for this to come up to a boil.
Sounds good. The key things that I've picked up from today would have been new strategies in dealing with the fruits themselves. I've worked with whole fruit before, and that can cause a lot of problems. I've moved to fruit purees to try to work around that. And then that brings up a new set of problems. So knowing to add that using a hop sack or a muslin bag is something I would integrate into my process in the future.
So I think we're at our 25 liters. So I just got a bucket here that we can let that finish draining in. Beautiful. And then we'll just get this lid back on and wait for this to come up to a boil. Then we can start throwing in our hops. So once we got to the boil, I used 9.7 grams of Zeus hops at 11% alpha acids for bittering. Now, the alpha acid is going to dictate how much of the hop you use because that's what gets absorbed in solution while you're boiling to give you the bitterness that balances against your sweetness from your malt. And then we're just gonna set a timer for an hour and we'll be back to finish off this brew.
All right, sounds good.
All right, so we've been boiling for an hour. Now we're gonna add our aroma hops. I do like to set up a whirlpool. So we've got the little add-on arm here that we can just pop in place. And then I always like to start it with the pump arm completely closed. That way you don't have to worry about it bubbling all that air up at you. And we will just let that go for 10-15 minutes, and then we'll be back to finish this brew off. Okay, so now that's been circulating for about 15 minutes or so. We're gonna turn our pump off. Just let that sit for 5 minutes. Make sure we're extracting all of those wonderful flavors and aromas out of those hops. And while we're waiting for that, we might as well get our wort chiller all hooked up and ready to go. I just switched to this little connector here.
Good.
Perfect. And I don't worry too much about sanitizing on the wort out because the heat of the wort is going to sanitize as it goes.
Right.
And I have already cleaned and sanitized and packed that. So we do actually need one bucket that we're gonna run things into just to make sure that we aren't getting any sanitizer into our beer.
Okay.
So we'll get this all hooked up, and by the time we're done, we should be ready to chill our beer. There we go. Okay, so now we're ready to chill everything down. I do like to just turn my water on first, make sure the chiller's nice and cold before I start sending any wort through there. So I've got the cold water right here. So that cooler feels nice and chilled off. So we're just gonna run the pump to clear any sanitizer that's in the hose, and then we'll move over to the fermenter.
All right.
So I'll just turn this pump on. And that's just running out any sanitizer we got. And there's our beer. So turn the pump back off for a moment. Come into our fermenter and turn her back on. So whenever I am pumping into the fermenter, I like to get as much oxygen in as possible. So I do hold the hose a little bit back just to make sure that it's picking up some oxygen. The especially great thing about using the Kvike yeast is you only have to cool to 34, so we can run this fully open.
Nice.
And it'll be done in just a few minutes.
Perfect.
So I usually just wait until I hear the pump start to give a little struggle, and as soon as I hear that, I turn it off. There it is. That goes off. Pop that back in our bucket. Turn off our water. You can pop that lid on. Now all we have to do is pitch our yeast.
Perfect.
So for the fermentation process, we went with a Hornindal Kvike. Now, a Kvike yeast is a Norwegian style that's been used over there for years and years, but is relatively new to North America. What I really like about it is it allows you to ferment a lot hotter than you would a traditional ale or lager yeast. So we actually pitched it at 35 degrees Celsius, and the main fermentation is done in like 3 or 4 days. Now, because we were adding fruit to his beer, you do want to add that during the fermentation process, but you want to make sure that the main fermentation is done. So most of the fermentation with the Kvike yeast happens in the first 24, at most 48 hours. So on about the 3rd or 4th day of fermentation, I added 1.2 kilograms of mango. And we also added a 30 gram of Cascade dry hop just to help bump up all those fruity flavors we were looking for.
I'm absolutely excited to try this beer we made today because I've never brewed with mango and I've never brewed with this yeast, and I know they both make great beer, so this should be a good one.
And now, of course, let's give it a taste. Cheers. Homebrewer Richard's Mango Wheat Kvike has finished fermenting, aging, and carbonating. Let's give this beer a taste. Welcome back to Homebrew Master. All our beers are done, and we're here for the moment everyone's been waiting for, the tasting. Our guest taster today is Heather Pond-Mannerome, owner and manager of the Blue Elephant Artisan Brewery. Heather, this is Richard. He's our homebrewer that we were working with for this episode, and we made a mango wheat Kvike together. Heather, why don't you tell us a little bit about your brewery and the beers that you make?
Well, we've been a brewery now since 2012, and we make all kinds of different brews. We make a strawberry lager, we make the Gentleman's Pilsner. We actually properly lager things, thanks to Sarah. We also make the Red Devil, which is an awesome red amber. It's kind of like Rickard's Red, but it has more flavor to it. We just like to make in a variety of different things. We usually have about 9 different things on tap.
What do you think about fruit beers in general?
I like the fruit beers. I really like beers that still taste like beer. So if you get the hint of the strawberry, but you have the beer behind it.
I'm with you on that, absolutely. And what do you think makes the Blue Elephant unique?
Oh, I think just all our different products and the fact that we have 5 different staple products that are on there all the time, our flagship beers. And then we also have all our our other beers that kind of flow with the seasons.
And you mentioned the Gentleman's Pilsner. That became famous when Mumford & Sons came to town, right?
That's right. In 2013, that was their beer. They picked that out for their big festival, and we
Nice.
just ran with it, and people loved it ever since.
Absolutely. So how long has the Blue Elephant been open?
We opened in 1992, so yeah, we're coming up to 30 years in November, actually. So yeah, we've come a long ways. We started out actually as a fine dining restaurant, and through the years we've just evolved as people have evolved and the business has evolved, and so now we're a pub and a brewery.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you've got a lot of Thai food as well, right?
We do. We have some Thai food, Western food. We really specialize in local affair. That's what I like to be known for that. And even with our beers, we like to incorporate a lot of local with our beer too.
That's fantastic. Thanks for talking about your business with us, and let's get to tasting this beer. All right, so we've got our mango wheat bike here. So normally when I'm doing a tasting, I like to look at the color first. So we can take a look at that. Now I do make hazy beers. That's just a preference of mine. What do you guys think of the color?
Love the color.
Came out quite nice for a mango.
Yeah, it reminds me of mangoes,
Yeah.
right? It's sort of that flesh color. And then of course we have the aroma.
Smells really rounded. Fruitiness, you get the fruit. You get fruit forward. Yeah, it really smells delicious.
I ended up deciding, remember on the day we weren't sure if we were going to dry hop with some Cascade or with some peel. I ended up going with the Cascade because I thought I wanted the mango to be able to stand out as much as possible and not to confuse it with too many other fruit flavors, right? And aromas. So I'm hoping that's what we got. And now, of course, let's give it a taste. Cheers.
Yeah, that's pretty darn good.
Oh, that came out well balanced.
Yeah, pretty happy with it. I definitely feel like you get that punch of mango up front, and then it's that thing you were talking about at the end. You still get that nice beer.
Yep. You get the beer in the end, but there's no bitterness or anything in the end. It just kind of washes down.
That finishes nicely with the Kvike yeast.
Yeah.
It gives you that sort of fruity character without going over the top, which I'm a big fan of that style. Plus, you can just make beers real fast, which is always a plus. So, if there's anything you could change about the beer, what would you want to do?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. That came out really nice.
Oh, I'm so glad you like it.
I don't even know if I would change anything. What did you do with the mango in the end? How do you end up adding the mango?
Well, I had some frozen mangoes, so your cell walls are already breaking down. And then, to be perfectly honest, I bashed the crap out of it. I don't have a juicer at home, so we just kind of took a rolling pin to it, and then it was in the brew for probably a week, and I just put it in like a hot bag and let it sit in there. And when I pulled it out, like you could see the yeast had just eaten everything, which is always, a bit of a relief. Sometimes you put fruit in there and you're not sure, like, is the yeast gonna get at it? Is the flavor gonna stay? So I did go pretty heavy. I put in 1.2 kilos of mango into the 20-liter batch because I wasn't sure. I haven't worked with it that much, so I wasn't sure how much of the aroma and flavor would stay, or if it's one of those fruits that would just sort of dissipate. But I'm pretty happy with the balance. I think it stayed there enough. You didn't sort of lose it like you can with some fruit. I know peaches are notoriously difficult to work with. So yeah, I was pretty happy to find out that you can brew with mango. Thank you both for joining us. I'm glad you both enjoyed the beer.
I think it came out quite well. Normally my goal with my beers is the same thing we were going for here. Normally that can take a few tries at home, especially the first time. Before you have experience with those ingredients, you might not know how much it's going to take to balance out the beer. This is what I would consider a good finished product for me, that I would leave that recipe alone at this point.